No one can predict the future, but Jack Uldrich can help you prepare for it. Jack is a leading futurist, author, and speaker who helps organizations gain crucial foresight they need to create a successful future. His work is based on the transformational principles of unlearning, or freeing yourself from the obsolete knowledge and assumptions as a strategy to survive and thrive in an era of unparalleled change. Jack is a prolific speaker on technology, change management, and leadership, and has addressed Fortune 100 corporations, venture capital firms, associations, not-for-profit organizations, and state and regional governments on 5 continents. He regularly makes television appearances on the Science Channel, the Discovery Channel, and is a frequent guest on major media outlets, including CNN, CNBC, and National Public Radio. Jack argues that creativity and action are more powerful and versatile than knowledge. He's here today to share his energy, anecdotes, and thoughtful business and personal advice to educate, entertain, and inspire you. Please welcome Jack Uldrich.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. Commissioner, thank you for having me. So the title of my presentation is The Future Demands Unlearning. And sorry, are we getting some feedback here? Is that better? Okay. Let me just tell you how I came across this concept of unlearning. I'm just going to summarize it with this picture. This is a picture of Lao Tzu. He's an ancient Chinese philosopher. And thousands of years ago, he said, to attain knowledge, add things every day. And I think we can all sort of appreciate that. But he said, to attain wisdom, subtract things every day. And it's my contention as a futurist that our world is changing so fast, but before we can embrace the opportunity, we're going to have to subtract, let go, and unlearn a lot of the things that we think we know. Now, with every presentation, I like to give my audience a big aha. And here's the big aha that I want you to take away from this presentation. The aha is, it's an acronym, and what it stands for is awareness, humility, and action. I think each one of these 3 principles is absolutely critical to helping you unlearn. And through my presentation, I'm going to come back to these themes of awareness, humility, and action. But I know that usually when most people hear my bio, the most common question I always get is, well, what do you do, Jack? What does a futurist do? And that's a great question, but rather than tell you, I'm going to show you. And I know many of you have already seen this video, but that's okay. I'm going to show it to you again anyways. What I want you to do is I want you to count the number of times the people in the white shirt pass the ball. Whoever gets the correct answer going to get a signed copy of my latest book. So does everyone understand what I'm asking? Count the number of times people in the white shirt pass the ball. Here we go. Okay, that's it. How many people counted 15? Could I see a show of hands? Okay, so some of you. What about 16? How many counted 16? More of you? 17? Okay, everyone who said 16, please stand up. Remain standing. 16 is, in fact, the correct answer. Now, unfortunately, I do not have books for all of you, but I have a tiebreaker. But only the people who said 16 and are standing can participate in this tie-breaking question. But whoever I see raise their hand first with the correct answer to this follow-on question gets the book. So of the people standing, who could identify all 3 changes in that video? All 3. Who saw 2? Okay, who saw the most obvious? Yes. The gorilla, congratulations. 1 out of 3, not bad. I will get you the book afterwards. Congratulations. Could I just see a show of hands? How many other people saw the gorilla? So it looks like about 30-40% of you, but even those of you who saw the gorilla, there are a few other things that you missed. Those of you who didn't even see the gorilla, let me show you everything that you missed. And if we could, this is in fact the exact same video.
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So I told you I was going to show you what a futurist does. Look, I gave all of you an incentive to focus like a laser on a very specific task. Count the balls, you're going to win the book. My guess is in your day-to-day job, regardless of what your specific professional responsibility is, you're focused like a laser on that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as a futurist, I have the luxury of stepping back and looking at the big picture, and the first thing I like to remind my audience is there is, in fact, the equivalent of an 800-pound gorilla coming front and center into our lives, only it is in the form of new emerging technologies. And these technologies are going to transform our job, and are going to transform what the future means for our children. But because of all of this technological change, we also know that certain jobs, certain industries are going to disappear in the very near future. It's kind of like the person in the black shirt just walking away. It's difficult to see this transformation, but as a futurist, I want to help you see what's going to go away, because it's going to open your eyes to why you might need to unlearn. But because of all of this change, customer behavior, student behavior, business models are changing in some really subtle ways. It's like the curtain changing color. It is difficult to see all of this transformation, but if we want to prepare ourselves for the future, the first thing we need to do is we just need to become aware of how much is happening before our very eyes that we're just not seeing. And as a futurist, I hope to share sort of everything that's happening, but you just haven't been seeing. So again, it's this idea of awareness. And recently I was reading a really wonderful book by Anthony DeMello. It's called Awareness. It's not actually about what I speak on. It's actually about more sort of spiritual awareness and things like that. But Anthony DeMello has this wonderful quote, and he said, "The shortest distance between a person and a new truth is a story." And the way he opens this very book is a story. And I've never told this story, but it relates specifically to this industry. So the story he tells is a father knocks on his son's door. He says, "Jimmy, get up." Jimmy says, "I don't want to get up." And the father says, "You have to get up." And the father says, "Why?" "Because you have to go to school." Jimmy says, "I don't want to go to school." And the father said, "Well, why is that?" "3 reasons," Jimmy said. "First, it's boring. Second, the kids tease me. And third, I just don't like it." The father thought about that for a minute. Then he said, "Well, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you have to go to school. First, it's your duty. Second, you're 45 years old. And third, you're the principal. Wake up." So that was a story, which I kind of liked, but here's why we need to wake up, specifically for our students. The World Economic Forum just came out with a report 2 months ago that said that elementary students starting this year, 65% of them are going to be working in jobs that don't yet exist. Their future, our future, is going to be really different. And we need to wake up to this fact, because once we wake up, it's going to open your mind to why we need to unlearn some of the things that we think we know. And if you don't think the world is changing fast, just yesterday, IBM said, "Hey, we've just come out with a new artificial brain. It's capable, it has the equivalent of 10 billion neural connections." And that might not mean anything, but here's what it should mean to you. By the time an elementary student reaches high school, so in just 8 years, or actually a little bit longer, maybe 9 years, that computer is going to be the equivalent of a single human brain. But then by the time they get to college, by 2030, it's going to be 10 times more powerful than the human brain. Our world is changing before our very eyes, and this is what we need to wake up to. But let me just tell you some other things. Before I talk to you about the future, I'd love to just sort of walk through how fast the world is changing. How many of you saw this news from just this month that Volvo said by 2019 all of their cars are going to be all electric? Did any of you see that news? That's really amazing. So the students that we're educating today are never going to own an internal combustion engine car, perhaps. But here's what it means to you. In my home state of Minnesota, just this month, we commissioned our first all-electric school bus. Why is that important to you? Because it's going to reduce their annual maintenance costs by $12,000. I know you all have tight budgets, but might electric budgets or electric buses allow us to spend a little more on our students as opposed to gasoline or diesel or ethanol? And absolutely, we need to be aware of how fast the world is changing. How many of you saw this news? This was from the month before in June. Amazon just bought Whole Foods. And you think, well, what does that have to do with me? Well, it might not impact you directly, but it's going to impact our students, because one of the most common jobs for students is working in stores. But in the not too distant future, clerks might be one of these jobs that just disappears, and here's why. Amazon just opened this store in Seattle.
No lines, no checkouts, no registers. Welcome to Amazon Go.
It's already here today, folks, but this trend is only going to grow exponentially more powerful. And if our students aren't getting those first jobs as clerks, where are their first jobs going to be? We don't yet know, but we have to begin preparing them for this future. And I had a wonderful high school teacher who taught me to think exponentially. And I still remember this. This was on the first day of school, my junior year. And in Minnesota, we sometimes start before Labor Day. And it was the first day of September. And we all came into his class, and he said, just after we sat down, he goes, "I have a little test for you. So there are 30 days in September. What would you rather have every day in September? $100,000 every day in September. That's one option. Or the second option, he goes, you get a penny on your first day, 2 on your second, that penny doubles for 30 days. And me and my classmates were thinking, well, what a dumb question. We're taking the $3 million. And everyone said that's what they would take. But he goes, go ahead, do the math. And I was pretty good at math, and through day 20, it comes to $5,242.88. That's the penny doubling after 20 days. But then it keeps on doubling. And you know what happens by day 30? By day 30, I would have been entitled to over $5 million. So what was Louis SCIENTI trying to teach me? He was trying to teach me to think exponentially. And here's the thing about exponential growth, is that it starts almost flat, 2 pennies, 4, 8, doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, but after just 20, it gets to 5,000, then 10 more, it gets to 5 million. The idea is that exponential growth is going to violate our expectations about the future, and I think this is the primary reason why we're going to need to unlearn. We're used to living in linear times, but we are now living in exponential times. And I'm going to walk you through some of these exponential changes. But first, I just want to let you know I've actually lived this. So when I was in Louis SCIENTI's class, how many of you remember this video game from our youth? That was Pong, right? We were playing on a black and white TV, sort of with the knobs. But that technology was getting exponentially better. So much so that this year, the Big Ten has now announced scholarships for esports. I would not have been able to anticipate that. But if I would have actually understood exponential growth and how these video games were getting better, I might have been able to anticipate that. But here's my point. We're going to live through a lot of exponential changes, and I'm going to start walking you through some of these. But here's the next way I want you to think exponentially. Who could tell me the mathematical relationship between these numbers? 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion? Anyone know? There must be a math teacher. There's some mathematical relationship. Yeah, I heard it. Each one is 1,000-fold larger than the next. The reason I tell you that is I want to go back to exponential growth. If something doubles 10 times, it's not 10 times as big. Through the power of exponential growth, it's 1,000. We go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024. So what that means is today, if there's a technology and it only numbers in the thousands, but it doubles for the next 10 years, it's going to go to the millions. If there's a technology that's in the millions but it's doubling, we're going to go to the billions. Each one is a quantitative leap ahead. This is a little hard to grasp. So let me just, and I suspect some of you are thinking to yourself, we're not going to live through any 1,000-fold increase. Before I talk to you about the future, let's just step back to 1998. So 18 years ago, I want to see how many of you can recognize this sound from 1998. Do any of you vaguely remember that sound, or can you pin that? Those of you who cannot, that was a 56K modem. All technologists have achieved in the last 18 years is a 1,400-fold improvement in bandwidth capacity. And we've gone from fixed landlines and desktop computers to today's mobile wireless world. Most of us have navigated that change fine, and it should open your mind to the possibility if you live through that 1,000-fold increase, you might continue to live through some 1,000-fold increases. But before I get to these 1,000-fold increases, this whole idea of wireless and bandwidth is the first trend we need to be aware of. Because here's what's coming next. Today we already have 4G speeds in many urban areas. But any of you recognize this? It's from St. Louis. It's North America's first virtual hospital. It's a real physical hospital, but what they hope to do in the next 3 years is to deliver telemedicine to 3 million people in parts of rural Missouri. That's what they hope to do with 4G speeds. But let me tell you what's coming by 2020, 5G speeds. And doesn't that sound like a nice incremental increase? Like, oh, we're just going from 4G to 5G. No, 5G is 100-fold faster. This is what is coming within the next 3 years. And undoubtedly some of you are saying, well, that might be fine in Kansas City and St. Louis, but I live in a rural area. I think it's even going to come to rural areas. It's going to need the assistance of the private sector and the public sector, but let me just give you one idea of why even your rural communities might be tapping into 5G speeds sooner rather than later.
We found a way to send multi-gigabit speeds using infrastructure you see every day, power lines. It starts with low-cost plastic antennas and devices developed in our labs. When these devices are placed along the power lines, the signals travel around or near the lines, not through them. These millimeter wave signals can enable ultra-fast connections nearly anywhere in a big city, rural town.
Ultra-fast connections in a big city or even a rural town. Your rural area might not have it yet, but it could have it by 2019 or 2020, and you need to begin preparing for this future because it's going to change a lot of different things, and you need to be aware of it. Here's the second trend we need to be aware of. This is wearable technology. How many of you already wear a Fitbit, a Fuel Band? So it looks like about 10% of you, and you use this to track your physical activity. You might use it to monitor your sleep, but it's only 3 years old. But has it ever occurred to you, well, what might the Fitbit 2.0 of the near future look like? Well, here's one idea. Personally, I don't know if that's cool, creepy, or a coming sign of the apocalypse. But here is the transition you and I are living through. The internet is only 8,000 days old. And when you think about that, it's pretty young. But when it was developed, how did we access the internet 8,000 days ago? Through our desktop computer. Now today, we're doing it through our smartphone. In the not too distant future, the internet and its information is going to come directly to us. It's going to be as though we and our students are living in the internet. And this is going to transform education in some powerful ways. And we see the early signs of this. My guess is not too many of you play Pokemon Go, but how many of you have heard of Pokemon Go? Could I just see a show of hands? So well over 50% of you, but this came out in July of just last year. And within the first week, there were already more people playing Pokemon Go than were on Twitter and Netflix combined. That's remarkable exponential growth. But you might be thinking to yourself, what does Pokemon Go have to do with me in the future of education? Here's what it has to do with you in the future of education. Pokemon Go represents the first widespread use of something called augmented reality. We're going to start layering digital information on top of the physical world. And this is going to transform both education and how our students do work in the future. Here's the best example of a company that is already using augmented reality, and this is an elevator technician.
As soon as the technician puts on his HoloLens, he already sees, I have a call here, I need to go to this elevator, and then actually sees a 3D picture of the elevator that he's going to work on, and that he can zoom into a part that will offer you also training opportunities.
So if we're already doing that in the workplace today, is it possible within the near future, as students are learning about the future of chemistry and actually seeing how molecules combine or how they dissect a frog, instead of actually doing it in the real world, to do it in virtual reality? And that might sound silly, but I don't know how expensive it is to get the frogs and all of the equipment into every classroom. And my guess is not even every classroom in Missouri actually has the funding to do that. But in a world of augmented reality, we are going to be able to do that. This future isn't here yet, but it's coming really quickly, and we might need to unlearn some of the things that we think we know about how to educate children in the future. Another trend that's growing exponentially that I think you should be aware of, this is 3D printing. Let me just show you this little clip. I just came across it yesterday. This is a 3D printer, so they print physical objects. So that's pretty cool, but the 3D printer in that video 5 years ago cost $10,000, not very affordable. This year it's available for $199. Not only does that allow us to start thinking about art classes in a fundamentally different reason, the other reason it's so important, 3D printers have the potential to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US. GE has already said they're going to be printing aircraft engines in the next 3 years. So think about that. Instead of producing them over in China, bringing them into a port, putting them on a ship, transporting them across the Pacific Ocean, bringing them into another port, putting them on a truck, and then delivering them to St. Louis or some other community. In the future, we're going to be printing very sophisticated objects right in our backyard. And the reason this is so important for rural communities is it's going to give us an opportunity to bring manufacturing jobs back to our communities. But if you're not even aware of this trend, you're behind the curve. But let me just show you what else is coming. Over in Kentucky, they're already 3D printing human tissue. And they've said within the next 5 years, they hope to 3D print a liver. And in 10 years, 3D print a human heart. The future of healthcare is going to change as a result of this. But just to show you how fast this trend is moving, here's what they're already doing out in California with 3D printers.
The walls of this house were printed entirely on site. This is the world's first actually printed house.
3D printed houses and engines are here today, but where are we going in the future, and how do we begin preparing students for that future? This is what we need to be aware of. The next trend, another 1,000-fold increase, this is advances in robots. Some of you might have seen this video. It's what UPS is already experimenting with drones here in the US.
The driver can take control at any time. It runs fully autonomously. So to have an autonomous route that all of a sudden a driver could take and say either recall it with one button push or navigate.
So that's pretty cool. But I came across a great article just last week, and the gist of the article said, we shouldn't be teaching ourselves or our students to run away from robots. We should be teaching our students how to dance with robots. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And I kind of got the concept, but then I came across this video, and I think this sort of gives us an idea of how our students might be interacting with drones and robots in the not-too-distant future.
The Aura doesn't look too different from other toy drones, but its controller trades sticks for fingertips. The quadcopter is controlled entirely with a glove using hand gestures.
That, to me, is an example of what it might look like or what it might mean to dance with robots in the future. But to just show you how fast advances in robots are moving, out in Nevada, there are now already, the state legislature has approved self-driven robotic trucks. And then to show you how strange the future is getting, I came across this photo recently. This is a self-driven robotic truck delivering self-driven robotic cars to Phoenix, Arizona. And now if you go to Chandler, which is a suburb of Phoenix, you can actually get a ride for free in a self-driven car. This future is happening really fast. And I'm just going to make an aside here. I know you're focused on elementary and secondary students, but the idea, as self-driven trucks take off, the most common job in North America are truck drivers. And as their jobs are eliminated, we as citizens have to think about how we retrain those individuals to move into different careers. The next trend, another 1,000-fold increase. This is advances in artificial intelligence. Here's how I want you to think about this trend. How many of you remember 4 years ago when IBM put its supercomputer on the game show Jeopardy? Any of you remember that? So that was 4 years ago, and it beat Ken Jennings, the all-time human champion. Well, all Watson has done in the last 4 years is gotten 1,000 times smarter. So what does IBM think is next? Well, here's what they think might be possible within the next 5 years because of artificial intelligence.
Because in 5 years, classrooms themselves will learn about each student, then personalize coursework accordingly.
I don't know if they will achieve that vision, but we need to be aware of the advances in artificial intelligence because they are going to transform how we conduct some of our education. And I'm going to come back to this theme of artificial intelligence just because I think it's so important. But another trend where we're seeing 1,000-fold increase is just the amount of data we are collecting on ourselves, on our students. It's growing exponentially. The amount of data we have today is pretty impressive, but it just represents that tip above the water line, the tip of the iceberg. We're going to know twice as much within the next 5 years, and then 4 times as much within the next 10 years. And let me tell you why this matters. People who understand data are going to start moving into some unconventional areas. And let me just give you one unconventional competitor to the future of education that I think we should all be aware of. And this is Amazon. How many of you already have an Amazon Echo? Could I just see a show of hands? So close to at least 10 or 5, and maybe 10% of you already have an artificial intelligence platform in your home or in your kitchen. And when it came out just 18 months ago, you know how many things it could do? 100. Last month it could do 12,000 unique things. This month, 15,000 different things. But every time you interact with Alexa, Amazon's collecting a little more data on you and your family and your children. And here's what they really hope to do with all this data in the next couple of years.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get from us.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get for us.
That's where we're headed, I believe.
Anything. They don't just say books or consumer items, anything. And they are now collecting so much data that their end goal is to know what you want before you even know what you want. But could that also pertain to education? Could Alexa start telling our children and our students, here are things that you need to know before they even know they need those skills and that knowledge? It might sound like it's way out there, but I'm here to tell you, I would not be surprised if within the next 3 to 5 years, Amazon opens up some sort of educational division. But now I want to just spend a few more minutes on this whole idea of awareness. And the lighting might not be the best for this, but it looks like it's pretty good. What I want you to do is I want you to look at this card, and as soon as you recognize what is wrong with it, and there's something blatantly wrong with it, raise your hand. Don't shout out the answer. So yeah, 5% spot it immediately, but keep looking at it and put your hand up as soon as you spot what's blatantly wrong with it. Okay, this is going to take too long. So in the interest of time, someone tell me what's blatantly wrong with this. The color is wrong. It's a spade. It should be black, but in this case, it is red. Here's why I show you this. Imagine if I just came up to you at lunch and said to you, hey, would you recognize a red spade? Most people quite confidently go, oh yeah, that would be so weird. I would spot it instantly. But as 95% of you just experienced, that's not what happens. And here's why. When our way of viewing the world has been so conditioned to see something one way, and we've always seen spades as black, that even when that new is staring us in the face, it just doesn't register. My message and the metaphor to you is, folks, our world has already changed, and it is as odd as a red spade, and we need to be aware of the change that is already here today. All of those trends I've told you about, they're not off in the future, they're here today. But what we need to be aware of is how they're going to grow exponentially. That is what we need to begin understanding for our children, and why it's going to require us to unlearn some things that we think we know about education. But to just show you how fast the world is changing and to pick up on this idea of awareness, I'm not sure how many of you saw this commercial during the Super Bowl. It is gross, but it makes a very powerful point. Comes, not surprisingly, from Amazon.
Alexa, reorder Doritos from Primaire.
Okay, look for delivery soon.
There in one 10-second commercial is artificial intelligence, and how are the Doritos being delivered to them in this theoretical future? Via drones. The signs of change are all around us, and we need to be open to all of this change. But let me give you a more practical example of awareness and artificial intelligence. I like to use this example with healthcare, but I think it's relevant particularly for administrators. Here's how some hospitals here in Missouri are already leveraging Alexa to increase the productivity of their nurses by 5 or 10%.
Nurses today spend about 5 to 10% of their time just taking care of stuff that has nothing to do with care. Changing temperature, changing the lights, changing his TV channels, asking questions about the cafeteria. Now we can automate the whole thing.
Nurses spend a surprisingly large amount of time on activities that, while are important to the patient, can in fact be performed by artificial intelligence. But here's what I need you to understand. I mean, these devices are only a couple of $100, maybe even $99 by now. As administrators, are there certain things that artificial intelligence could do in your school or in your district? It's not going to replace workers. What it is going to do is allow you to then focus on the most important activities of your job. If the computer can answer basic questions from parents and other people about bus schedules and other things, by all means, let's leverage technology to do that so that we can focus on the more important aspects of our job. But here's just one other way. If you don't think these advances in artificial intelligence are coming fast, J.P. Morgan, their artificially intelligent computer in 3 seconds did the job of what it used to take 120 attorneys a whole year to do. Our world is changing really fast. And the reason I have this up here is, here's one of the things I think we're going to learn is that, or we need to unlearn. Many of us have thought that if you or your child goes to law school, that is a ticket to a upper middle class lifestyle. And we are still going to need attorneys in the future, but we might not need as many. And we need to start thinking about if our students can't, or we don't need as many lawyers, what else are they going to do? And they're going to have to start thinking differently, and we're going to have to start preparing them for a different future. So now I told you the title of this presentation was, or I wanted to give you the big aha, and I said the H stands for humility. And let me just tell you how I came to be humbled myself and how I came to write my first books on unlearning. When I was 4 years old, the first way I was taught to tie my shoes was bunny ear style. Does anyone still tie their shoes bunny ear style? Yeah, there's no embarrassment. Come on, race. We're one. But over the years, I always saw my friends do the faster loop around method, but I never bothered to learn that method. But when my daughter was 4 years old, I thought, well, I have to teach her to tie her shoes, so I'm going to, I didn't want her burdened with this handicap, so I decided to teach her the faster wraparound method. But of course, I had to learn it first, and it took me 30 seconds to learn it, and it was better, and my shoes came untied at a much slower rate. And I thought, why did it take me 30 years to adopt this new, better way? And at that moment, I recognized I needed to unlearn my current practice before I could embrace something better. And from that point on, I started keeping a file of things that I thought I knew were true, but they just weren't. And this folder got bigger and bigger and bigger over time, and ultimately I came to write the book on unlearning. But I then came across this TED Talk. How many of you watch TED Talks? And it was on tying shoes. I thought, oh, I'm going to watch it. This is great.
This is the way that most of us were taught to tie our shoes.
And that's how I taught my daughter. I was like, yes.
Now, as it turns out, thank you. Wait, there's more. As it turns out, there's a strong form and a weak form of this knot. And we were taught to tie the weak form. And here's how to tell. If you pull the strands at the base of the knot, you can see that the bow will orient itself down the long axis of the shoe. That's the weak form of the knot. But not to worry. If we start over and simply go the other direction around the bow, we get this, the strong form of the knot. And if you pull the cords under the knot, you will see that the bow orients itself along the transverse.
So why do I show you that video? The reason I show it to you is at the age of 50, I was stunned to discover I still was not tying my shoes in the optimum fashion. So talk about humility. And now, to tell you the truth, I only wear loafers, but the future is going to relieve me of even having to tie my shoes.
Shoe for the first time, they automatically tighten so that they're just snug enough to get up and go.
So now I won't even have to worry about tying my shoes. But no, my point is that was just a metaphor, and I do keep it in the back of my mind. Whatever I think is the best way, might there be a better way out there? And I think if we can all just constantly ask ourselves this question, if we can stay humble to that idea, we're going to stay open to the concept of unlearning. You might think you know what is best in your job, in your profession, for your students, but just have a little humility. Because if you do, you're going to keep an open mind, and I think you're going to be more open to better, improved ways of doing things in the future. Now, I want to give all of you a little test for humility. So what I want you to do is I want you to turn to your neighbor and answer for your neighbor this simple question. What two colors are the yield sign in your Missouri community? Go ahead, tell the person next to you what two colors the yield sign is. Okay, I have heard the answer. So how many of you said yellow and black? If you said yellow and black, congratulations. That was the correct answer up until 1971. The yield sign has been red and white since Richard Nixon was in the White House. I'm sure a lot of you go, no way, that's not true. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is true. In fact, I just went to the Big Bear Cafe last night, and there's a red yield sign there. As you're coming into the resort at that roundabout, there are in fact 3 red yield signs. And undoubtedly some of you are going, well, in my rural community of Missouri, they're still yellow. No, they're not. They're not yellow anywhere in North America, and they have not been for decades. But to me, this is a great metaphor for humility. And here's the metaphor. Look, it is a fact that years ago, when many of us were first learning to drive, yield signs were yellow. The problem is that old, crappy information has just stayed stuck in our head, even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence to the contrary. We've been zipping by these things for decades, and it just hasn't processed. My message to you is this. There are certain things you learned about education, your job, your students, your competitors, the parents, your communities. Yes, they were all true yesterday. It does not mean that they are still true today. We all need humility to the idea that not everything that sits up here is still necessarily true. Now, those of you who said yellow or yellow and black, I'm not done with you yet. If you're a little curious as to what your brain looks like, here's what your brain kind of looks like. So that's what your brain I actually know these people. They're from Nebraska. That might explain a little bit of it. But no, so that's just a lighthearted example. But let me give you another example. It doesn't relate specifically to education, but it does speak to how fast our world is changing. If I was here 5 years ago and said to you, in most major American cities, St. Louis, Kansas City, what color are taxis? What would most of people have said 5 years ago? Yeah, we would have said yellow. But of course, is that true anymore? No. How many of you have already used Uber? Could I just see a show of hands? Yeah, well over 50. How many of you have heard of Uber? Yeah, virtually everyone has. But here's the point. 10 years ago, Uber could not have existed. GPS, mobile, cloud technology all existed, but those 3 technologies had not yet scaled exponentially and then converged to the point where a company could create a platform to do what? What does Uber really do? Well, what it does is it allows strangers to give strangers rides safely. That's what it does. And it is the basis of a $70 billion corporation. But here's where it gets important. It has decimated the taxi industry. But it's not just decimating the taxi industry, it's transforming the automotive industry. And why is that? It's because many young people, especially in urban areas like St. Louis and Kansas City, instead of owning a car, they say, why should I spend $15,000, $20,000 on a new or used car and then insure it and I have to deal with parking? I only use it a couple of times a week. I'm just going to access a car a couple of times. So they're trading ownership for access. Do you see how one technology is disrupting businesses, it's changing business models, and it's changing how young people think? And I'm here to tell you, all of the technologies I've told you about are going to continue to scale exponentially, and they're going to converge, and we're going to create different platforms to think about industries in a fundamentally different way. And our challenge as educators is to think about how we prepare students for that future. So what's one way we can do that? Well, here's one thing that I think that we as leaders have to unlearn, and I'm going to sum it up for you in 7 words. Give up on answers, stick with questions. In a world where change was relatively modest, we could bet on answers. But in a world where change is accelerating, we have to get better at asking questions. And I love this quote. It said, it's not the answer that enlightens, it's the question. And any of you know what the peak question asking age is? 4 years old. And after that point, students begin to systematically ask fewer and fewer questions. If we are going to help them not only survive, but thrive in a future, we have to instill in them the ability to constantly ask questions. But we as leaders also have to get much better at that. And let me just give you one way I like to think about this, is what I'm going to do is I want all of you to, on a scale of 1 to 10, think about an answer to this question. How intelligent are you? On a scale of 1 to 10. And I'm not going to call on anyone. I just want everyone to think of an answer. My guess is because you're all educators and smart people, but you're humble people, most of you are saying somewhere between 8 and 9, you know. And that's fine, but how many of you can come up using the exact same 4 words, a far better question? Using the exact same 4 words. What's the better question? It's not how intelligent are you, it is how are you intelligent? And at some level, we all know we are intelligent in a different way. And I think that this really gets to the core of education, that we continue to think there is an answer to that question, how intelligent are they? And on certain areas, there is. But in a world where change is going to be constant, we need to get much better at identifying how each and every one of us and how each and every one of our students is intelligent in their own way. That we have to get better at asking questions. Now, I'm going to stay on humility for a bit longer. I came across this photo on my social media feed, and I suspect he is a great teacher, but for 40 years, for his school photo, he has been wearing the exact same shirt and sweater vest, and I thought that was just hilarious. But I thought, ooh, that's another great metaphor for the future. And here's the metaphor. How often have we heard people, especially senior leaders, say, well, I have 20, 30 years of experience. And sometimes people truly do have 20, 30, 40 years of experience. But sometimes they have 1 year of experience repeated 20, 30, or 40 times. They just learned something early in their career and they worked and they've just kept doing it. And again, in an era of linear change, that's fine, but it does not cut it in a world of exponential change. And so let me just give you an example of where we might need to think different, particularly those of us who have had a lot of experience. For a couple of years, the science was a little nebulous about late school starts, but over the last couple of years, the science is incredibly compelling. That melatonin levels, particularly in teenagers, keeps them up late, and they don't really get into the learning process until a little bit later in the day. We have been starting school at, is it 8 a.m. here in Missouri? Yeah, it's probably all over. But how many of you actually have late starts? Okay, there is one. And how's it working? Up? Okay, great. That this is something, we've been doing things for one way, but as the world changes and as we're presented with new information and new science, we might need to unlearn start times. And here's another question as leaders you have to ask yourself. I know some of you going, that's great, but there's no way it's going to happen. For parents don't want it. I get that, but as leaders, here's another question I think we all need to ask ourselves. What is the can't do that needs to become the can do? If you say you're really all about the students and the science says the students learn better with later starts, what is your obligation as leaders? You might say it can't be done, but leaders overcome those barriers. So what is the can't do that becomes the can do? Here's another example of humility, but I'm going to relate it back to the theme of big data. So what I want you to do in this little test is count the number of times the letter F appears. How many times does the letter F appear in that statement? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. Once you've counted once, double check your work. Okay, how many people counted 3? Could I see a show of hands? Okay, how many people counted 4? What about 5? What about 6? Okay, so 3 was the most common answer, followed by 6. But only those of you who said 6 got it right. And there they are. And again, the overwhelming number of people count 3. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First, the word is small, our eyes pass over it. Phonetically, it doesn't really sound like an F. Of sounds more like a V, so there's some brain-related reasons we skip over it. But it does not get over the fact that you thought you saw the world clearly, you double-checked your work, but you still missed things. To me, this is a great metaphor for big data. You might think you know your job, your students, but I think I might know the microphone, but seems to have a mind of its own. But my point is, we need to understand what we are not seeing. And this is what big data is going to do. And there's one, it's a university, but it's Georgia State. And they're now collecting data on test scores, grades, attendance, other things like that. And because of all of this data, you know what they've been able to do? They've been able to come to new insights to their students. And you know what they've discovered? Is that a lot of those first-year students were dropping out. But now with new data, they know which students are struggling. And among freshmen, they've been able to increase ultimate graduation rates by 30%. And among minority students, by 40%. You and I, we might think we know our students, but I'm here to tell you, we're going to collect so much more data. But this new data is going to challenge some of our assumptions. And we need to have enough humility to keep an open mind to doing things differently. Here's another metaphor for humility. If I were to ask you in very simple terms, why does it get hot in the summer? What happens in relationship to the earth and the sun? And so I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but they asked this of every graduating senior at Harvard University a number of years ago. And here's what 98% of all Harvard graduates said.
Earth goes around the sun. And it gets hotter when we get closer to the sun, and it gets colder when we get farther away from the sun.
So essentially, he said it gets hotter in the summer because the earth gets closer to the sun. I mean, that seems to have sort of a certain level of resonancy. I mean, if you step closer to a fire, you get warmer. But of course, it's the wrong answer. And we all learned in 4th or 5th grade, why does it get hot in the summer? It's because the earth tilts. My point is, sometimes intuition is so strong that things feel like the right answer. It feels like that should be why it gets hot in the summer, but it is wrong. And my point is, as leaders, lots of times we're told to trust our intuition. How many of you have ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink? Have any of you heard of that? And it's a wonderful book, and it's called The Power of Intuition. He says, just trust your gut. It's like, how great is that? I just have to trust my gut. And it's a wonderful book, but he makes a fatal mistake. He only tells stories of when people's intuition was right. He doesn't tell all of the stories where people's intuition was wrong. So we all have deeply held beliefs and assumptions. And my point to you is, on occasion, just hang a question mark on every belief that you have, to just keep an open mind. How might I be wrong? And I think if you do that, you're going to be more open to unlearning. But to show you how fast the world is changing and why we need humility, the iPhone has just celebrated its 10th anniversary. But here was Microsoft's CEO's reaction when it came out 10 years ago.
Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard.
Doesn't appeal to business customers. Well, I know you're not business customers, but how many of you have an iPhone? Could I just see a show of hands? Yeah, well over 80% of the population does. He's a bright person. My point is, could he have just used a little humility? He looked at that technology from an old perspective. He didn't understand how young people and other people might warm to these new platforms sooner rather than later. And let me just give you another example of, I know that I suspect some of you are going, there's no way artificial intelligence can do the work of a teacher. And again, I want to make a really strong point. I am not suggesting artificial intelligence is going to replace teachers. But one school in Paris, you know what they're using artificial intelligence for, particularly over the summer, is called interval learning. The idea that we know if we could just reach students during the summer, they're not going to forget a lot of the lessons that they learned September through May or early June. So they're using it to augment teaching. And I know that I was doing a little research that it sounds like your online summer program at Grandview is really impressive, but this whole idea of can we be using artificial intelligence to reach even more students or to keep their skills up to speed in chemistry and physics and basic math? The answer is yes, I think, but we have to be willing to play around with these new tools. But playing around with these new tools is not easy. Often, whenever we're introduced to a new technology, we like to think, oh yeah, I get how I'm going to use that. But sometimes we should have a little more humility. You're all going to recognize the technology in this clip. It's 30 years old. It's the desktop computer. But let's see what happens with her. So, I showed this to my kids a while back, and they're like, that's just dumb, Dad. They had no idea what a manual typewriter was, so the whole joke was lost on them. But we can laugh at this, but I think a lot of us make the same mistake. I suspect some of you are like augmented reality, robotics, 3D printer. That's not going to happen. Again, you might be right, but maybe, just maybe, because you didn't grow up with this technology, you might not be the first one to really appreciate how they're going to transform education. Let me give you an example of a technology I've not yet talked about, and that is virtual reality. Could I just see a show of hands? How many of you have already tried virtual reality? So it looks like about 20% of you. So these are a wearable technology. You put them on and it feels like you are wherever the goggles are showing you to be. Those of you who have not yet experienced virtual reality, I'm going to try and give you a feel for this. This grandmother is watching Jurassic Park, so she feels she's in a park with dinosaurs. Let's see how it feels. So apparently it's pretty good. But I know that some of you are going, no way. You're not going to be caught dead wearing something like that. Well, again, let me just relate it back to education. This is a really short clip, but let me just show you how some innovative educators are helping students understand chemistry and music. Oh, I thought it was going to be a little bit longer. But again, you and I did not grow up with this tool. That is not how we were instructed. That is not to say that young people might not really warm to this. And again, I want to relate it back to online education. I understand a lot of the rural districts today, you don't have the technology and the broadband to actually even harness those speeds. But in 3 years, because of 5G speed and some others, you might, and in the not too distant future, you might be able to leverage those technologies to better educate all of your students in a variety of fields. We're not yet there, but as leaders, you need to be aware of these trends and start thinking about what the potential might be. Here's another thing that we all need to do is embrace ambiguity. I came across a great study a couple of years ago, and they said, what makes a successful administrator teacher? And one characteristic rose to the top. You know what that characteristic was? It was an administrator or educator's leader to embrace ambiguity. Too often we like to think that things are true or false, they're black or white. What word do y'all see up here? True. How many of you see something different? Let me just show you this. From a different perspective, it is false. I like this. I like it so much I'm going to show it to you again. True from one perspective, false from another. And I think if you want to remain open to unlearning, you're going to have to learn to embrace ambiguity. Just keep an open mind. And let me go back to this idea of artificial intelligence. How many of you remember 20 years ago when the world's best chess player lost to IBM's computer? Any of you remember that? Well, in the last 20 years, computers have only gotten wickedly more powerful, so it's impossible for anyone to beat a supercomputer, or so you would think. There is, in fact, one thing that still can beat a supercomputer. Any of you care to wager what that might be? It's an average chess player using an average computer. Human experience, intuition, plus technology take us to a higher level. There's always going to be a role for teachers and educators, but I think the super educators of the future, the ones who are going to be the most successful, are going to be the ones that use technology to become even more productive, to understand their students even better. So do not be afraid of technology. Learn to dance with it. I think those are going to be the greatest educators in the future. And let me just make one other point as a futurist. I love technology, but I also embrace ambiguity. And I just like this clip. I think it speaks for itself.
Huh? Emma?
So technology is more productive. We can use it to save the environment, save paper.
Emma. Emma. Emma?
So my point is there are some things that technology simply can't do, and I think we all recognize that teaching our children and our students is one of those things, and so I just like that as a lighthearted point. In the interest of time, I'm going to go over a couple of these questions. I know I've been talking at you a long time, so I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. What I want you to do is I want you to watch me as closely as possible and do exactly as I do. I want to see how many of you are paying attention. So I want everyone to participate, but if you do have arthritis of the hands, you're exempt, okay? So everyone watch me as closely as possible, do exactly as I do. Put your hands up, put your hands out, wiggle your fingers, clap your hands together. Now, flip your hands over. Everyone take your right hand and put it over your left. Everyone, this is your right hand, even here in Missouri, very good. Now, lock those fingers together. So they should be locked. Now lower them, tap those index fingers together. So, were all of you watching? Because if you were all watching, everyone in this room should be able to quickly, simply, and elegantly, and without moving your shoulders, rotate those fingers 180 degrees to the top like a gun. Thumbs up here, all the way up here. How many of you can do that? There are a few, there are one or two of you in the front, but are most of you somehow suspiciously locked up and you'd have to go all the way over? All right, so have a seat, but if you did end up locked up, I want you to acknowledge clearly I did something of which you were not aware. And you should have some humility to the idea that even though you were watching me, you missed something. I'm now going to show you the trick, and then I'm going to tell you why I show it to you. First, I know if I don't show it to you, half of you are going to be under the table for the next couple of minutes. Like, how'd that guy do that? Dang him. So here's the trick, and you can go back and do this with other people at your school or in your district. So you say, watch me as closely as possible, do exactly as I do. Put your hands up, put your hands out, clap them together, flip your hands over, take your right hand, put it over your left. Everyone does that right. But you might remember I then acted as though someone here in Missouri did it wrong. I said, no, 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 your right hand. And I moved my right hand out. And virtually all of you tracked it with your eyes. As you were doing that, I used that deception to flip my other hand that way, which then allows me to do that. But if you don't see it, you end up locked up. So why do I go to the trouble of showing you this trick? Here's why. Here's the one thing I know for certain as a futurist, and it is this. It is after I leave here today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade, our world, the world of our students, is going to change. But if we don't become aware of this change, what's going to happen to us? We're going to end up locked up, inflexible, and behind the change curve. But if we do pick up on these changes, we're going to be flexible, adaptable enough to steer ourselves and our students and our districts into the future. So that's a long way to set up the final A, and that stands for action. And the one action I need all of you to take is to regularly take time to think about the future. I actually advocate leaders take an entire week every year. And I can already hear what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, who do you think you are to tell me I have to take a week to think? Don't you understand how busy I am? I do understand how busy all of you are. But if you're saying you don't have a week to think about the future in a world that's changing as fast as ours, you're saying you don't have 2% of your time. If you are not thinking about the future of our students, who exactly is? And I get that a week is a lot. If it's too much, break it down. Take an hour a week. Take 15 minutes a day. I don't care how you do it, but regularly step away from your daily grind, your daily pressures, to read, think, and reflect on how the world is changing. And Commissioner, I'm going to share with you, it's a one-page Think Week resource guide with websites, other periodicals of how you can stay on top of a lot of these trends. So I will share that along with my entire presentation for anyone who wants it. But let me just give you one thing I think you should be thinking about. I love Missouri's Bright Flight program, and you're giving your top 3 graduates an opportunity to move on to college, and that's wonderful. But you know what Arizona State is now doing? They're offering every freshman in the state education for free online. Now, some students will still go to the regular university, but many students need a little remedial work. Others, after a year, find that college just isn't for them and they're going to community and technical colleges. Could Missouri be doing something like that? If we really care about our future, there are models out there. But after we do all this thinking, I want all of us to think really big as leaders, and I'm going to end on this note. And here's how I want you to think about the future. So what I want you to do is I want you to picture a pond the size of this room. And for the sake of argument, let's say it is the first day of the month. And on the first day of the month, there's a single lily pad on this pond. It's perfectly sized. It's actually really tiny, but it doubles every day in the month. So on day 2, there are 2. The next day we go to 4, then we go to 8, 16, 32, 64. You get the idea. And on the last day of the month, this entire pond is covered with these little lily pads. Can everyone kind of picture that? So here's the question. I'm going to give the book to whoever gets the answer within 1%. So on day 20, so 2/3 of the way through this doubling, how much of the pond would be covered? Just start shouting out some guesses. I'm going to give the book to whoever is within 1%. So 100%? No. 25? No. 1%. Congratulations. You are within 1%. Do you know the more mathematically precise answer? You still win the book. Okay, fair enough. But most people think it's 100, 25, 50%. But no, the answer is 1/10 of 1%. And a lot of you going, what do you mean? For the last hour, you were telling me how fast all of these technologies were doubling, and you said the lily pad was doubling, but it only covers 1/10 of 1%? Yes. In fact, this is exactly what I am trying to tell you. Because what else did I tell you? If something doubles 10 times, it could be 10 additional times. How much bigger does something get through exponential growth? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. It gets 1,000 times bigger. So here's what happens over the last 10 days. By day 25, we're just a little over 3%. Not until day 29 that we get to 50, but once we get to 50, boom, the whole thing is covered. Why do I show you this? Well, I suspect some of you are thinking to yourself, well, Mr. Future Man, if the world is changing as fast as you say it is, how come my world feels pretty much the same? My message to you is this. All of the trends I've been telling you about have, in fact, been doubling. What I need all of you to understand, we're just at day 20. The really big change is just ahead of us. This is the future we and our students need to be aware of. This amount of change is going to require humility, but it demands that we prepare ourselves and our students for it. So I know I've just dropped a really big bomb. I know a lot of you are looking at your watches going, I wish it was 5 o'clock. I just need a beer or a good stiff cocktail. My head hurts from all of this. But I want to give you hope, optimism, and confidence you're going to be able to handle this future. You know why I'm so confident? Because you've already done it. I gave you that earlier example of the 56K modem. Let me give you another example. This is from my college years. But back then in the late 80s, one of the biggest movies of the year was Wall Street. Any of you remember that movie? Michael Douglas plays Gordon Gekko, high-powered Wall Street guy. But to show he's high-powered, can any of you remember what technology they showed him using in that movie? Yeah, it was that big brick-like monstrosity. That bad boy cost $5,000. It only made telephone calls, and it belonged to less than 1/10 of 1% of the global population. Only the super wealthy. All that technology has done has gotten better, faster, more affordable, and as it has exploded out like that lily pad to the point where it's transformed our world. To help you understand how strange the future is going to be, sometimes it just helps to appreciate how odd things are today. This farmer in Africa now has access at his fingertips to more information than President Bill Clinton had in the year 2000. That is remarkable. But my point is, I want you to think of all of the technologies I've told you about, the robots, the 3Ds, the virtual reality, the augmented reality. We're just at that clunky cell phone stage. Each and every one of these trends is just going to get better, faster, and more affordable. And as they do, they are going to transform education, and they're going to transform the world for ourselves and our students. And let me just show you this example of exponential growth. This is the number of miles that self-driven cars are driving. Started out really slow, but in the last month went from 2 million to 3 million. In not too many Shortly thereafter, we're going to go from 3 million miles to 3 billion, and then from 3 billion to 3 trillion. Each one's a quantitative leap ahead. Our world is going to change. So what is next? Let me end on this note. As a futurist, I don't claim to predict the future, but I love the quote from Peter Drucker, who said, "The only way to predict the future is to create it yourselves." Your future, the future of your students, is in your hands. And here's where we need to unlearn. We need to go from asking the question, how creative are you, to how are each and every one of us creative? Every single person has a role in the future, but we're going to have to start thinking differently, and we're going to have to unlearn. So keep an open mind to that, and thank you very much for everything that you do for the citizens and the students of Missouri. Thank you.